So Martha, let's go back a while, quite a ways back. Who was the earliest farmer in your family?
James Clark of Wheatfield.
Is there a wheat field still?
There is a wheat field at housing development, and the home is still there, but there's no farm there anymore.
Montgomery Road.
Yep.
Okay, so Wheatfield was a section of Howard County. I need to know that for myself.
Right. It's on Montgomery Road, not right next to the Longgate Shopping Center.
Thanks. And what was that you remember? I mean, that you've heard, of course. What was that like?
I have a picture in my house, a photograph of the 80th birthday of James Clark of Wheatfield, and that was in 1880. And he was surrounded by his 2 sons and 2 daughters and their families. So my grandfather was a 3-year-old child in that picture. My great-grandfather was an adult, and my great-great-grandfather was the center of the picture, and they were celebrating his 80th birthday on the porch at Wheatfield, which was on Montgomery Road.
And what do we call great-great-granddad?
James Clark.
Do you remember what James Clark owned farm-wise then?
It was about a 200-acre farm, and I presume he raised crops there, but I don't know.
Okay. So the earliest you knew about would be his son?
Well, again, I don't know him. He would be my great-grandfather. His name was John Lawrence Clark, and he farmed the farm called Fairfield, which is now Running Brook, which is on the same road that I'm on, Route 108, about a mile down the road from the farm that I farm. And that was called Fairfield. It was another 200-acre farm, and he raised Angus cattle. He was renowned as a cattle dealer. Very few people bought cattle in the area without checking with him first, and he, even as a young child, would go up to Chicago and buy cattle and bring them back, and it was a cattle broker.
He did this on how much land then?
He had about 200 acres.
So then that meant they went to slaughter here, or how?
I don't know anything about those details. Yeah.
So what else can you remember about that time period of what he was doing?
Only what my father told me, which was that he raised cattle and that he was a cattle broker. And in Dad's memoir, he talks about he was instrumental in creating the Turnpike company that built, paved or put stone down on the road that went from Clarksville to Ellicott City. The Clarksville Turnpike, which it's still called Clarksville Pike, and that comes from, excuse me, being the Clarksville Turnpike. I still have the stamp from that. It belonged to Dad, and now I've got it. The thing that you I guess embossed papers with and that kind of thing about the Clarksville Turnpike. So all the farmers along the road would take all the stone that they got off their fields and throw them into the roadbed, and then they, I guess, raised money too to fix up the road by charging to go along the road.
And they had stone crushers too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they were pikes. That means you paid, and then the
right.
pike was turned, and then you
yeah.
So let's stay with those early times, Martha.
Yep. So then my grandfather was born at Fairfield, and he became a lawyer and later a district circuit court judge. Oh, I should know that, but I don't.
It's on my deed.
Yeah, right. And so he, the farm left the family when Columbia bought it, but my grandfather did not farm it. He raised beef cattle too, just as an avocation, not kind of more of a hobby. And he, for himself and his wife Alda Hopkins Clark, he lived on about a 30-acre farm called Keewaydin, which is on Columbia Pike, and my grandmother raised horses there. And then in the early 30s, my grandfather, James Clark Sr., bought Ely Oak Farm. And that farm is the farm that we're on now. And he bought that to run cattle, and with the thought that one or another of his sons would be interested in farming it as they got older.
So, Ely Oak?
Ely Oak.
How did that name come about?
That was the name of the community. If you look at the old maps, you look at that old Hopkins map from 1878, you know, there's the Columbia Post Office, and then there's the Ely Oak Post Office, and then there's the Pine Orchard Post Office, and then there's the Clarksville Post Office, and that was the name of that little community right around, you know, my great-grandfather, you know, would pick up his mail at the Ely Oak Post Office, which was at, as I understand it, at the corner of Manor Lane and Clarksville Pike.
There was a school there too.
And there was a school there too, that's right.
Your grandfather got motivated to buy the Ely Oak farm because of what had happened in his circumstances of his life at the time.
Yeah, he wanted to continue to raise cattle, even though his main avocation, his main job was being a lawyer. But he still wanted to raise cattle because he had, you know, his family had done it all their lives, and he also had 3 sons who he figured might be interested in farming. So he you know, and I guess he was lucky enough to have a little bit of money, and I'm sure land was selling for cheap. It was the middle of the Depression, so it was an opportunity to purchase that land then.
Did you ever hear a figure on the cost of it?
It could be in Dad's book. I'm not exactly sure.
How much land was it?
330 acres.
Oh, we jumped up from the 200 acres.
Yeah.
So, remind me of Granddad's name again.
My grandfather was James Clark.
So
My
James.
father was James Clark, and neither one of them had middle names. So one was the senior, and my father was James Clark Jr.
Okay. So Senior came onto this land with the ambition of getting a few more good legal contracts and a few more good cases to process, but other part of his life was on this farm. Meaning, did he get to operate much on the farm himself, or did he have?
No, I don't think he did much on the farm at all. He had a couple of people helping him, and he never lived on that farm. He lived on Keewaydin.
Oh.
He lived at Keewaydin,
Okay.
and he just bought this farm so he could run some Angus cattle. And so basically, you know, there were cattle, there were fences, and some barns. And you know, it wasn't a full-time farming operation for him.
When was the house that's there now put there?
Well, you're talking about the house that I live in. That's not even that farm. The Ely Oak farm is the 330 acres that goes back a mile. It right across from that Parolina. You know, it's the furthest western entrance to our farm. There's 2 entrances to our farm. It makes a big L, and the Ely Oak farm goes back about a mile, and it adjoins Mr. Johnson's place, which is now, you knew Ed Johnson, right, Mr.
Yeah.
Johnson? It adjoined his farm, which of course now is Manor Hill Brewery and Randy Mariner's place. And in between, Tom Scrivener owned it. And then that adjoins Doregan Manor. So we back up to Doregan Manor, which makes our farm, Doregan Manor, the University of Maryland farm, and I guess Holly Hills and a few other farms sort of in that area, the largest contiguous farm land in the county, even though we're so far east.
Was Burley Manor further east?
Yeah, no, Burley Manor adjoined us too. Yeah, of course that's all developed now too. But anyway, in fact we had rented Burley Manor for a while and raised hay there. I remember. Well, we can get to that later. But anyway, so there was a small stone tenant house and another, tenant house, and a barracks barn, and a large hay barn on the farm when grandfather bought it, and that's it. So I grew up in the little. I was born and lived the first 4 years of my life in that little stone tenant house.
When was this?
Dad
No,
came.
I mean, when were you born?
Well, I was born in 1954,
Oh, on what day?
December 4th.
Okay,
Yeah.
so go ahead.
Yeah, so anyway, Dad came back from World War II. He had been a glider pilot, and all he wanted to do was farm when he came back. So he came back, and he, in 1945, and started farming as soon as he got back, married my mother in 46, brought her to this little stone tenant house on the farm, and raised cattle. He bought the cattle from my grandfather and bought all the machinery from my grandfather, and had an agreement from my grandfather to buy the land as he could, afford to do it. There was very little equipment, very old farms. A tractor. I think there was one old tractor, 6 horses, one seed, planter that was horse-driven, and of course at the time, there were long lines for people getting tractors, and but I think the GIs got an opportunity to sort of get ahead of the list a little bit. He was able to get some equipment within a couple of years, but in 46 and 47, in 48, 49, he raised crops and beef cattle, and had some terrible years and some good years, and just like everybody else. And in 49, I think he started dairy farming, because he decided that just like a lot of other farmers, that it's nice having that monthly milk check come in. You didn't have to.
From the beef to
Yeah.
the monthly milk check, there was a few years.
A few years, yeah. And he kept the beef. He never got rid of the beef cattle. We've always had beef cattle,
He
but
just didn't enlarge the herd.
yeah, he didn't enlarge the herd, but he did buy Holsteins and build a milking parlor and start milking.
How many could he handle?
I don't know. I think he probably had, I don't know, somewhere between 100 and 200 probably most of the time that I was growing up. And then my brother took over the operation in 72 and increased it more, but that's another story.
So you were born with a brother, I just found out.
I was born with an older brother. His name was
Anybody
Mark,
else?
and I had, there was a sister who was between us. My brother was born in 1950.
There's 3 of you.
Nope, there's 4 of us. My sister was born in 52, but she did not survive. She died when she was 6. And I had a younger brother who's 8 years younger, who was born in 63. And
So all
3
or
of us,
4
yeah.
Depending on whether I take
Yeah.
the first 6 years. But
Yeah.
in the first 6 years, remind me, the one who passed away was younger than you or older?
Older. Yeah, she was between Mark and me.
So you're the next to the youngest.
Yeah, I'm the middle.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, when
Yeah.
one passed
Yeah,
away,
right,
you are
right,
the-
right.
I'm just getting a picture.
Yeah.
So life on the farm then.
Okay.
We're going to focus on
Got
that
it.
for a bit.
Okay.
So tell me a typical day that you can remember of yourself on that farm in those early years, 5, 6, 7 years old.
Yeah, well, first, when I was 4, Dad leased an additional farm that adjoined our farm, which is where I live now, an additional 160 acres from,
Sounds like 300.
in addition to the 330. So 330 plus 160. And he started leasing that sometime before I was born, and it was an older couple, Dallas Brown, and he'd been farming it all his life. He didn't have any children who were interested in farming it, and so Dad had leased it from him, farmed it with the right of first refusal to buy the property when both Mr. and Mrs. Brown passed away. He passed away first, and she passed away in 58, 56, 58, something like that. And so that's when we moved out of the little tenant house to the house that I live in now, that my parents lived in from 58 until both of them passed away. And that's the house at the corner of Centennial Lane and 108, and that's where my earliest memories are really from.
Okay.
Yeah.
But to get to that additional land, he must have had a purpose and a mission in mind for that, to lease it.
Well, yeah, it was just, you know, the more land he actually, I was reading his memoir before I came over here today, so I know a little bit more. But he not only leased that land, he also leased, he had the property up on, in Sykesville on 32, kind of a little bit down from Steddings up on the hill. Anyway, it's a farm, you know, on the right-hand side of 32 heading towards Sykesville. He also rented Fairfield for a while, the farm that had been in his family. Cousins still owned it, and they weren't farming it, so he rented it. And he rented land further down 108 at the corner of Cedar Lane and 108 for a while. So any place he could rent and grow crops gave him more land for the beef cattle and the Holsteins. So, you know,
he was
yeah.
feeding his herds.
Right, right.
Pretty enterprising kind of business guy here.
Yeah, yeah. He
he
intended to, you know, support his family by farming. So that's what he did.
That's good to
Yeah,
hear.
yeah.
So at the ages of, let's go to where your sister at 6 passed away. So you're now 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. In that period of your time, you were on the farm, and obviously this whole thing was happening right around you. Let's say outside your bedroom. There's an entire world of farming, right? Can you remember some of the experiences then, as a general sense of what was going on as you saw it as a little girl?
Yeah, I did. You know, I remember Mark was 4 years older, so he got involved in helping with the milking much earlier than I did. I didn't have to do any milking until Mark went away to college. So then I would, you know, by then Dad had a milkman, so Dad would only do the weekend milkings. So when Dad did the weekend milkings, I would help him, but that was, you know, as I said, after Mark went to college. So as long as Mark was there, he did most of the farm work, the working with the cattle and milking and baling hay and that kind of thing. I was riding my pony and feeding calves.
How come you got a pony?
Because my grandmother, my grandmother Clark, who was Judge Clark's wife that lived at Keewaydin, was fanatical about horses. She raised horses her entire life, and she didn't think your life was complete if you didn't have a pony.
Were you ever at a place to see her horses?
Oh Lord, I spent a great deal of time. I had grandparents both within 5 miles of where we lived. I would go over and spend a lot of time at Keewaydin with my grandmother and help her take care of her horses and ride. And then my other grandparents, my mother's parents, were also farmers. My mother's entire family farmed. My grandfather, his father, and all his aunts and uncles farmed all the land that's the airport, BWI Airport. It was called Friendship Airport, named after their church, Friendship Methodist Church. And all of their land was purchased by eminent domain when they needed to build the airport there. And so it was just about the time my grandfather was close to retiring. So what he did was he resettled in the middle of Howard County to be close to his daughter, my mother, and you know, because he needed to go someplace, so it made sense to come here. So he had the farm that is in the middle of Columbia now. He was Blandair, Nancy Smith's neighbor. The farm right next to Blandair It had a name, but I never remember what that name was. I'm sure it had a name, but no one never called it that, whatever it was. But it was a beautiful big white house with a whole bunch of outbuildings and a beautiful big barn. And he raised cattle, and he was a vegetable grower. That's what they grew on those farms. They provided all the vegetables for Baltimore City and all up and down the East Coast. And they had all the pickers, all the migrants, whoever the current immigrant was into Baltimore, would come down and pick all the vegetables. And they had an entire system of picker checks and a company store, and there's all books written all about it. And Anne Arundel County was the bread basket or the vegetable basket of the United States for a long time.
What's your age?
Probably the late 1800s, early 1900s, I guess.
This is on your mom's side.
My mother's side, yeah. So that's where she grew up. She grew up in Harmons.
Did you get to visit over?
I did not. All of that. I visited my grandparents who lived in the middle of what is now Columbia now. I never knew I was, all of that had taken place before I was born. So we would go down and drive past the house in Harmons, and Mom would say, that's the house that I grew up in, and it's on Hawkins Drive, which is her maiden name. And I know the area where she came from, but it was all developed and all gone and turned into the airport by the time I was born. But I did also spend a lot of time at the farm that is, now bisected by 175, and the house is still there, but it's completely surrounded by townhouses. Not a single outbuilding left.
Where's the intersection? 175 and what?
Well, the house is the White House that sort of overlooks the fire station at Tamar Drive. And it's right there. The tree-lined driveway is no longer a driveway, but the trees are still there, and they, shade someone's townhouse. What's still there is the little white rancher that Pete the Greek has, the guy with the snowball stand and all the trees in the yard, and that's all grandfathered in, and that he can do anything he wants with, and nobody can say anything to him about it because he was pre-Columbia. And that was my my aunt and uncle's house. So that was part of that farm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when you were little, and you had this farm around you, you had a bunch of equipment, and you had the opportunity maybe to learn to use some of that equipment?
No, I didn't do much with that. My father, I guess, was closet sexist. I worked with my mom. I gardened.
You wouldn't even know how to say that then.
Yeah, right. Because he certainly wasn't in his public life,
So
and his.
We're saying that your brother.
Yeah. My older brother. My younger brother, that was a whole other story, but because he was so much younger.
Who helped your dad then?
It was my older brother who helped him the most, yeah.
Okay.
And, I remember picking up rocks, a lot of picking up rocks.
Okay.
I remember one year we were on a campaign against yellowweed, and every night after dinner we'd go out and pull up yellowweed in a field that he was trying to get the yellowweed out of. And I remember riding all over the farm. I would ride all over our farm, and then across the Johnson property, and then all over Dorakin Manor. And Mr. Wilson would come out and yell and scream at us until he saw who it was, and then he'd say it was okay, and we'd go back. And but I did a lot. I did that a lot.
Riding what?
Riding ponies.
Oh, okay.
Riding my pony.
Okay.
Yeah. And I even rode from my house to my grandparents' house, the one on Tamar Drive, across 29, which, it was a 2-lane highway then, but it was still a highway. And then I kept my pony over there for a while, and then I think we might have trailered it back. But that was, you know, across 29 and down Oakland Mills Road. And I had a cousin who, my dad had a cousin who lived there. You know David, did you know David Clark? He was the state chemist.
No.
He was a cousin of my dad's, and he had a little farm there on Oakland Mills Road. And then, yeah, and then all the McGuires. There was a farm at the corner of 175 and 29. That was Frank McGuire had a farm there. They were all cousins too. But anyway.
Do you remember any experiences of any of your early family living without electricity?
No.
Do you remember anything about the water coming into the land?
No. Dad says in his book that there was no electricity on the Ely Oak farm when he got there, when he came back from the war, and that was the first thing he did was bring electricity in. But I don't know. I don't know about a well when he put that in.
So, when you were little, and this was during the week, obviously I'm pretty sure you were going to school as well as living on the farm.
I did go to school. Yeah.
What was a typical during the week day like? It could either be at the beginning of this farm of the growing season or at the end of the farm growing season, whatever is coming back in your memory. Like, what was your day like to you?
Well, a day that I wasn't going to school, I remember, you know, if there were any chores to do, I would do them. I mean, we would involve with baling hay from early on, you know, as soon as you could start, you know, throwing hay bales around, but it's certainly not at 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. I wasn't doing that. I remember spending a lot of time outside doing what apparently no one does anymore, which is playing. I remember my dog and I would go down to, we had this beautiful stream area with all these old volcanic rock, and I would just go down there and play for hours. I remember coming in at lunchtime and my mother checking my head for ticks and eating lunch and then going back out again and not coming back until dinner. Either that or riding. You know, usually I didn't ride alone, so I'd have a friend come over, and we'd ride, or my cousin, she would come over, and we'd ride together. But it sounds pretty idyllic. I know I'm pulled weeds and shelled llama beans, and you know, as I said, picked up rocks and that kind of thing. But
Did you
that's
and
what
your
I remember.
brothers have bicycles?
No, I to this day do not know how to ride a bicycle. I think Mark's finally learned, and my younger brother, of course, he had a bicycle because by then we actually had, you know, some paved roads and that kind of thing. But it never made any sense to me to have a bicycle because I had no place to ride it. So,
how were you getting to school in those days?
I walked out to the end of the lane, which was about 2/10 of a mile, and I was picked up by a bus and taken to Clarksville Elementary.
Now, this name Clarksville has come up a couple times, and I'm beginning to associate your name with the word Ville. Can you fill me in on how that occurred?
Well, if we go back to all those Clarks again, there were 3 Clark brothers who came here from Northern Ireland in 1797. One went somewhere else, and we don't have any record of his existence or, you know, what happened to his descendants. But the other 2, David Clark and John Clark, are the 2 brothers from whom all the native Clarks in Howard County are descended from. James Clark of Wheatfield is the son of John Clark, and David Clark is the father of a long line of Clarks, all the ones in the western part of the county. So Bucky Clark and, you know, and then I don't know if you knew Charlie Clark. Do you know Charlie Clark? He was a very...
Bucky.
Oh, okay. And then Charlie Clark was involved with the Historical Society a lot. But anyway, there's lots of them. We have a big reunion of all of the descendants of all of these Clarks, and about every 5 years. And it's a nice big crowd.
So where do you think Clarksville came from?
That came from the David Clark line. We're about as far west as our Clark line went. And all of our farms are in the Ellicott City area. Spring Hill, Wheatfield, the one that is Longgate now, that had a different name, which I'm not remembering now. All of those were descendants of John Clark, and those were all our immediate line. And then all of the farms out in the western part of the county, from Clarksville further west, were the descendants of David.
Somebody said, let's call this area Clarksville. I still haven't quite got the...
Well, I don't know. I wasn't around when that happened.
I asked because you may have known.
No.
Since it was David Clark, it could have been called Davidsonville.
It could have been. That's right. But
So it was, Clarksville itself was way back.
Well, it was before the 1878 map, the Hopkins map was built, because it is on that map. So I would imagine maybe back to 1850s or 1860s or something like that.
I don't have the 1878 atlas with me, but it used to list how many people lived in every one of the communities, and it still does.
Yeah, that's a great resource. It's a tremendous atlas, yeah.
So you were little, again.
Yeah, a long time ago.
But they were a special time.
Yes, they were.
A lot of
special
things were
times,
being formed in you.
Yeah.
A lot of interests were being formed. A lot of passionate things were coming out about what's important to you individually. And obviously your pony became very important. Did I get the name of your pony then, your first pony?
My first pony was Bobby.
Bobby, okay.
Yeah.
And so you got the opportunity to not be pushed hard as a farm chore kind of daughter.
Right. I did, I weeded and, helped her shell lima beans, as I said, or anything she needed in the garden. But my mother also, I think maybe this was where this division of labors came up. My mom, even though she grew up on a farm, she never learned to drive a tractor, and I think she made a very concerted decision when she married my father to not learn to milk cows and not learn to drive the tractor, because she was smart enough to know that the minute you learn to drive those things, the minute you learn a skill, Lillian, so-and-so didn't come in today, or, so-and-so just, fell off and broke his leg, and, he's got to go to the hospital, and now we've got to do the, get the crop in, come on down and drive the tractor. So she just purposely chose not to learn any of those. So she kept her kitchen garden. She was in garden club. She was very involved in the community. She was on some boards and commissions. She raised us. She made sure there was wonderful food on the table every day. My father always said, I made the living and Lillian made the living worthwhile. And but she was not involved in the farming operation. And, so I actually, by the time I was a teenager, was driving the tractor and was helping bale hay and was, helping milk cows. So I ended up doing those things, once I was a teenager, but not so much, earlier than that.
Other than shelling vegetables and corn, stuff like that.
Yeah. One of the things I did at like 11 or 12, I was the very first Clark to sell sweet corn. My dad put a whole bunch of corn in a little red wagon and sent me over to Beaverbrook. And I, knocked on doors at Beaverbrook with my little red wagon, and of course no one turned me down. So for, I think, 50 cents a dozen or something like that, I hand-delivered sweet corn. And then not long after that, we started the produce stand, which, is still there. So,
Martha, I kind of believe that your mom setting that precedent with your dad, it's a strong precedent of saying, this is where the division is, this is where I'm going to operate, and I'm not crossing my line. And I think you saw that, obviously you saw that, because you wound up getting a pony, for instance, which is a perfect distraction from having to cross that line.
Right.
I'm just putting
Yeah.
this together in my
Yeah,
head. It may not be true. It's just insight seeing it.
Yeah.
So you had, so also you were going to school then, and so during the week, you would spend time. You would just go to school, and then I'm trying to get a sense of what typically 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Right.
Your day was like.
Right, so I'd go to school, come home, maybe ride, do homework, do whatever needed to be done around the house, around the farm. And then I do remember things like my grandmother, because she was so horse crazy, she was always doing things. She organized the horse shows at Doe Reagan Manor. Did you ever go to any of those?
Sure.
Yeah. Did you ever ride in them?
No, but I remember they were set up when we walked the
Yeah.
at the church.
Yeah, she would, it was a fundraiser, I think, for the health department at the time. They were raising money because, they didn't have any money. And, it was part of the government, but, sort of like we have a health department, but we don't have any money to vaccinate people or, have a clinic or whatever it was that they were trying to do at the time. So she did that. So I remember going to horse shows. I remember competing in horse shows. I remember going to the Iron Bridge Hunt Club horse shows, and she would organize those, and I remember riding in those lead line classes and walk trot classes and things like that.
Dressage type?
No, this was at the elementary level, so this is like lead line class and walk trot, hoping that you stay on your pony, going around in a circle. It was very elementary. I mean, there were people riding, adults and children riding in that, who were much more advanced, but at the age that I'm describing,
I'm gonna back up a
this
little
is,
bit. Polly? Who was the horse?
Bobby.
Bobby. Polly. Where did that come from? It must have been somebody else's horse.
Yeah.
Bobby came from,
My grandmother,
and your
Clark.
grandmother bred Bobby?
No,
On her
she just
place?
found some, ornery little pony to give me. She bred and raised thoroughbred horses. She
serious side.
yeah, she would breed them and raise them till they were about 1 or 2, and then sell them to somebody who would raise them.
And you traveled back and forth? Mm-hmm. Was it a long trip back and forth?
Yeah, about 5 miles.
Oh, that's all?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
It's just a warm-up for a pony.
Yeah.
so she had a serious, successful breeding.
A very small operation, yeah, but some of her horses
It
ran.
wasn't a hobby.
No, some of her horses ran on the track, and some ran in steeplechase races, and some ran in regular races.
And there was somebody taking care of those horses
My grandmother?
herself. Mm-hmm. So there weren't too many that she had to get.
No, it was just no.
Okay.
Later on, when she got older, she had an assistant, someone who came and lived with her and helped her take care of the
Did
horses.
Bobby
but,
ever need any medical help?
I don't think so. He needed a farrier. He needed a vet from time to time just to make sure that, but not, he didn't, I don't remember him ever colicking or foundering or
Nothing
anything
serious.
like that, yeah.
So when
yeah.
the vet came for inoculations or so, do you remember who the vet was?
Oh, the only vet I ever remember was Dr. Lewis, and he is still our vet today. Yeah.
We videoed.
Yeah, there's a story for you.
Talk for an hour
He
and a half.
should be writing his story the way James Herriot wrote his stories. And I tell him every time I see him, he should be writing a book. And if he ever retired, he might, but he's still going strong.
He told us he was going to write a book.
I hope so. Tell him, yeah, no, I every time I see him, I think everyone should write a memoir. My dad wrote his memoir, and it's a wonderful, wonderful book, and I think everyone should.
How would you describe, this is just this part of your dad,
Yeah.
how would you describe the farmer part of Dad?
The farmer part of my dad?
Yeah.
He was a wonderful farmer. He was innovative. He worked incredibly hard. Again, I'm quoting from his book because I was just looking at it today before I came over. He had one stretch where he milked every day for 14 months straight without, because he didn't have any help. But that's still pretty, and the cows do have to give milk, but usually somewhere along the lines, somebody will give you a break every once in a while. But that was early on, before he had people who actually did the milking for him. But he was also, the minute no-till became a reality, he was the first to adopt no-till in Howard County, or at least that's what he says in his book. I don't know if anybody would refute that or not, but that does sound right, because I remember at the time him doing that. He was one of the first to fence out the streams and put his land in the CREP program. He was always interested in new innovative ways of doing things. He talks about the first 4 or 5 years milking, taking the cans out to 108, and they would be picked up by a truck that came by, and the cans would be delivered back that same afternoon empty. Then he'd fill them again, and then he talks about getting the pipeline milker and then having the milk truck come,
What's a pipeline?
well, just getting a milk tank. The milk goes up through it goes right into a glass pipe and then into a tank, rather than going into a milk can.
Okay.
And then having the milk truck come and pick up the milk out of the tank every day or every other day. He had a fairly innovative milking machine at the time, I think, when he put it in. And then when my brother took over the dairy operation, he put in a carousel milker, which was a new innovation at the time. They were always looking for the new things, that would improve how we farmed.
We would like to hear your story about some of the equipment coming up, how that decision took place, if you have some experience.
I don't really know much about that.
That's right, you were with Bobby.
I was with Bobby, yeah. He's a good farmer, smart farmer, a innovative farmer, and he also was very involved in the farming community and Howard County as a whole. He was among the people who started the Howard County Fair. He was on the Soil Conservation Board. He helped get the Farm Museum, the Antique Farm Machinery Club started. He started the Howard County Conservancy. Soil conservation. He was a 4-H leader. He involved in a lot of things. Farm Bureau.
Okay.
So,
I'm getting the idea.
Yeah. He was a leader.
Getting that idea. But I kind of like to hear that transition and how that transition did occur.
Well,
because I only know it right now from you as a
right.
farmer working.
He was a very hard-working farmer, but there were 2 things he wanted to do in his life, and one was to be a farmer, and the other was to be in the legislature. And so when he turned 40, he was born in 1918, so in 1958, when he turned 40, he said, if I'm going to go into public office, I need to do it now. And he was invited to be on a ticket. At that time, there were tickets. You'd be the senator would be at the top of the ticket, and then there'd be people running for the House of Delegates, and then there'd be people running for sheriff and county commissioners, and at that time, and the clerk of the court, or all those the other jobs, and so he ran for the House of Delegates in 1958 and won. And he was in the House.
For the state of Maryland?
The state of Maryland.
Okay.
And he was in the House of Delegates for 1 term, and then he ran for the Senate, and he was in the Senate for 7 terms.
What was going on with the farm then?
Well, if you know your history, you know that the reason legislatures meet in the winter is because when we created this country, the time that the farmer legislators could actually take time away from their farms, the Jeffersons and the Washingtons of the world could get away and pass laws and take care of their states and their country was in the winter. So, by then he had someone milking cows for him. He still had to milk cows on the weekends, so at the time, the legislature didn't have as many bills to take care of every year, so they very seldom ever met on the weekends. And so he did what, farmer legislators all over the country did. He was in the legislature for 90 days from January to early April. Then he came home and planted crops and harvested them, and then celebrated Christmas and Thanksgiving, and then went back to the legislature. Just the way it should be.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you have a really good mentor in terms of the prowess of this man, let's say.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
And I'm sure that's affected you in growing up and through time as well, which is a good thing.
That's a very good thing.
I wanted to make that point. So at some point, Dad was getting elderly enough to not spend much of the time on the physical operation of the farm as he grew older, right?
Well, the way the progression went was that my brother in 1971 and my father agreed that Dad was taking on more and more responsibilities with the legislature, and Mark wanted to farm, and Dad and he decided that it would be better for Mark to take over the farm completely rather than have a partnership. So Mark took over the dairy operation, well, the whole farming operation, starting in '71, and he expanded the dairy herd and built the carousel milker, and my father, was certainly, drove tractors and helped when he could, but was more involved with the legislature and the boards and commissions he was on. He was on the, hospital board and the bank boards, and, we were traveling around the country to legislative conferences and things like that, so he was busier. So my brother took over the farming operation and ran it until about, I think, 83, 84, when he had expanded it to such an extent that it was bigger than could run profitably on, he wanted to expand more, and he couldn't expand more on the 500 acres that we had. So he moved the whole dairy operation down to southwest Georgia and expanded it down there. And so then, starting in 83, 84, my father had the farm back again to farm. And
there was nothing there.
Well, he kept the beef cattle.
Ah.
There were always beef cattle, so the beef cattle were there, and crops. And so just the dairy operation moved.
Gotcha.
So for the next 20 years, from 83 to, I guess 20 years to 2006, my dad continued to raise the beef cattle, cow-calf operation, and raise crops, and then as he got older, he rented some of the land. By the time I took over the farm, I started helping him in 2001 because he was in his 80s by then, and he was renting out about 100 or so acres to Ricky Bauer, and then he raised a couple of fields worth of crops, and he still had the beef cattle. That's when I came on the scene. Before that,
Before you came on the scene,
right.
hold on a second.
Finished with the with that. No, where do you want to go with?
Legislature.
Yeah.
Dad's in that.
Right.
He's got a lot of stuff he's rooting for, meaning a lot of the state. Did he spend much time? I call it rooting, but you put fancy words to it. But the bottom line is, did he have passion and care about Howard County, and did that fit into his legislature operation?
Oh, absolutely.
I'd like to hear about that.
Absolutely. He everything he did in the legislature, he was a socially liberal but fiscally conservative, and he believed that equal rights, and everybody should have the right to do the best with what they had, and that there shouldn't be any prejudice or segregation or anything like that. He was an early on proponent of fair housing and integrating schools and just everything everything. He was very strong proponent of civil rights and everything that entailed. But he was also a strong fiscal conservative, so he felt that the state should, not be spending money they didn't have, and he worked very hard to get a good pension system that could fund itself instead of having unfunded liabilities like it has now. He was the father, along with another wonderful senator named Bill James up in Harford County, who was also a farmer, of Program Open Space, which has bought all the farmland, all the parkland, all over the state. It's why we have so much land in parks all over the state. Program Open Space is a great. It takes a quarter of a percent of the transfer tax every time land sold in this country, in this state. A quarter of a percent of the transfer tax goes into a fund to buy parkland. And he uses the same funding mechanism to create the Ag Preservation Program, which takes a quarter of a percent of the transfer tax, and that goes into a fund to purchase the development rights on farmland. Maryland is still, it was number one, and considering our size, that's absolutely incredible. Number one in the total amount of farmland preserved in the Ag Preservation Program in the state, in the country. Number one in the country. Pennsylvania has since, just in the last year or two, exceeded us in actual farmland, not percentage, but actual farmland. And, Pennsylvania is 10 times bigger than we are? I mean, it is a phenomenal program that we have in this state, and it has preserved 290,000 acres of farmland, something like that. I just looked at the figure today, but I didn't memorize it. That's one of his strongest legacies. But he was the person who proposed or suggested that they consider the county farm preservation program. Howard County also has a farm preservation program, and so and it's one of the first counties in the country to do that. And because of that, we have a tremendous amount of farmland purchased, development rights purchased in the county program as well.
Do you have something that came to mind?
Well, here.
Okay.
Just checking in.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating.
Oh.
I mean, this is great.
Yeah.
This is great. So you're now moving forward in time. Dad has passed away. Brother, tell me his name again.
Mark.
Brother Mark is pretty much involved with the farm operation.
No.
Straighten me out then.
Yeah. Okay. My brother took over the farm operation in '71, long before my father passed away.
Okay.
My father was in his prime, but my brother took over the operation because that's what he wanted to do, and my father didn't want to get in his way. He wanted him to farm the farm here. So he did that, and then he moved the dairy operation down to Georgia. So then my father ended up with the farm from '83 to 2006, and was just sort of rented some out and ran cattle, and was not he farmed it full time, but it was not. It was in his retirement that he was farming it. But all during that time, we had the produce stand. We raised sweet corn and vegetables. I forget about all the things. All the time I was growing up, and all the time Jamie, my younger brother, was growing up. We had the produce stand. It was, at that time, everybody had. Most everybody had gardens, so you didn't have the whole world. You didn't have to feed everybody in Howard County. You just had to feed a couple of people in Howard County, and so for a long time we would just have a truck out at the end of the lane, and we'd have the sweet corn on the truck when we had it, and people would drive by and they'd buy a couple of tomatoes, they'd buy a dozen ears of corn. And this was all when I was in high school and college, and while my younger brother, well, I went off to college, and then he was doing it, and then probably about the time Mark moved the dairy operation, we probably got started having a little bit more of a permanent presence at the end of the lane with a little building, and then actually, we've been there ever since, selling produce in the summer, sweet corn and tomatoes, cantaloupe, that kind of thing, and so.
Well, you were busy playing with Bobby. Who was helping at that stand?
Bobby was long gone by then.
I was joking about
Yeah, yeah. No, this was in high school and college, and I came back actually. When my brother was running the farm I was in college, and so on my summers home from college, I came back and I was his hay boss. I baled. I was in charge of the hay crew and did all the hay baling with him, and painted all the barns and all the barn roofs. I painted every structure on that farm at least 2 or 3 times. Painting is one of my one of my skills, and one of the things that Dad figured out early on I was good at, and he'd tie a rope around my waist and put me up on one of those roofs and throw the rope over the other end and hold on to it while I was, and lower me down a little bit, as I was going. So, yeah, I did do a lot of painting in my lifetime. So, and now I'm painting all those Enchanted Forest things. I still haven't gotten away from painting.
So, is barn red or white, or what was the favorite of many paintings?
Actually, Dad painted. We didn't have a color scheme. One barn was red, one barn was white. Some of the roofs were silver, some were green. We didn't really go for the. We've never really been one of those, calendar picture perfect farms. We've always been a little bit more.
Are you saying you didn't want to be on the cover of Farm and Living?
No, I would like to have been, but it would have been beyond our capabilities. I think we were good on the scrap metal that you picked up at the dump when you were dropping something else off, and you brought it home and you covered the holes with it, or said, several of the barns on the farm were made from old billboards. At some point in time, Dad got some lead on they take the billboards down and all the sides of all the buildings. The outsides were like just regular. On the inside, was Lucky Strikes and Miller Beer or something like that. And then after 4 or 5 years, they start to peel off, and so we've had all of that.
This is what period of time?
Oh, in the 80s, I guess. Yeah.
Are we okay on the ship on there? There's still memory left. Yeah. Tell me how many minutes are left, because I want to ask a few more questions and I don't want to miss. Can you see in the upper right corner?
It's like 97.
97 left. Okay. That's money, plenty of time.
Yeah.
Now, up above it says 6 or 17. That's something else.
What does it say?
I mean, in parentheses it says 97.
That's what I care about.
Okay.
Parentheses.
Okay.
So now I'm actually hearing Martha getting some serious involvement with farming now.
Yeah.
Because I was hoping she got out of this Bobby period.
Well, you're a little obsessed with the Bobby period.
She was hiding from a lot.
Then there was Snowman, and then there was right.
And so what happened to Bobby?
Oh, Bobby eventually died, and then I
Did he die on the farm?
I guess so. I don't remember. And then I rode my brother's pony, General, because Mark didn't have any time to ride General because he was doing all the work. So then I rode General for another, 5 or 6 years. And then General went to live in Montgomery County with, Harford County with a friend. He was a companion pony for some old horse somewhere, and then I had to go to work.
So the period of time when you were helping your dad and you were painting the barns and stuff like that's pretty interesting, because you wound up leaving going on to your own life and then coming back when he was in his elder years.
Right, yeah.
Because you realized that you could give something to the farm because he was not as strong as he used to be.
Yeah, that's a good, let me give you a try, I try to give you a very short version of all that because it's, I left, I went to school at Duke, got a degree in public policy. Dad had it all figured out. I'd follow him into public life and, that whole thing, and Mark would follow him into the farming. And, and we did everything we were supposed to, so that sounded like a good idea to me. I was always loved politics, always loved political science, history. Those were my favorite subjects in school. So I got a public policy degree from Duke, worked for state government for 10 years, worked on women's and children's issues. I was executive director of the Maryland Commission for Women for 5 years and worked for the Office for Children and Youth. And then I married the local farm and home service dealer owner, a wonderful man named Doug Christ. And I came back to the farm. We built a house on the farm. My farm.
Right.
He had a farm. He came from Western Howard County. His parents had a farm, the Christs, but they also had the Southern States dealership in Sykesville and Ellicott City. So when I met him, he knew my father and my brother very well, but I had never met him because I apparently didn't do enough work on the farm, so I never was sent down to Farm and Home to pick up anything. So I made myself known to him, and it was a whirlwind romance, and we got married he asked me to marry him after a week, and we were married within about 3 months, and we had 2 children, and I helped him in the store. I did accounts payable, accounts receivable, and worked in the office at the Ellicott City store with him. And so I know the names of all the farmers in the county because I used to send them the bill every month, but I don't necessarily know them by sight. So we did that for 14 years, and I was, raising the kids. They were in 4-H. We were very involved in all those activities. And then he passed away when in 2000.
Pretty young?
Yes, 52. Yeah. Yeah, and so I had a 10-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter, and a majority ownership in Farm and Home Service, and by then we had bought an additional 40 acres of land that adjoined. It was a leftover parcel of the Gerwig farm that was, the county had bought most of the farm to put Centennial High School and Burley Manor Middle School. They had 40 acres left over. There were 40 acres left over that they didn't have a use for. And it adjoins our farm in the back. So we had bought that and built our house there. And so that's what I had to deal with when Doug died. And so I sold my majority interest in Farm and Home Service to the minority owners of the days because I didn't want to run a business. I didn't want to own a business that I didn't know how to run better than the other people in it. So and they knew how to run it better than I did. So and then I went to my father and I said, I have 2 children to raise, and I need to figure out what to do. Can I come back to the farm, and is there something that I can do to help you run the farm? So he said, yeah, come on back. So I started helping him run the farm, and it was then that I opened up the Sun one day and read an article about the cider mill farm closing down, which was a petting farm and pumpkin patch and cider mill on Landing Road in Elk Ridge that school children went to, there you go. Everybody went to, to get their pumpkin, to get their cider, it was a place that schools went for school tours and that kind of thing. And I'd always wanted to do that. I had visited petting farms all over the country when we got on vacations. When we went to England, we'd go see them. And I'd always thought that was a good idea. Doug and I had talked about it for a while, but never got around to doing it. So I said, this is the perfect time to do this, So I worked with the woman who was running the cider mill at the time, and got some ideas from her, and opened up that year the petting farm, and we've been doing that since. It opened up in 2002, and we've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, when the cider mill at Ilchester shut down, Senator Clark was actually on the scene when the club was taking all the equipment in.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I want to get back to that for a couple questions, but I'm gonna. There's so where Centennial comes off of 108.
That's my farm.
There's an old house in the back. As you're coming up Centennial, there's a driveway, and it goes up to an old house.
That's my house.
Is there any sheep there?
I don't know.
No, there's no sheep in that part of it.
That's your house
That's
now.
Yeah, that's my house now.
But
That's the house that I lived in from 1958 until I left and established my own home. And then I built a home on that property that we bought next to Centennial High School. And that's where I raised my family. And then when my father died in 2006, I moved back into the home that I grew up in and left Nora in the home that I built, that she grew up in.
Do you remember when your dad passed?
August 18th, 2006.
2006. So did your dad live with you?
No, he lived in that house. I did not live in that house until after Dad died. Yeah, I lived in the house that I built on the farm. Yes, I know. It's
No,
yeah.
This is
Yeah.
weirder than weird.
Yeah.
I did a project for the transition of the farmlands of Howard County into Columbia.
Oh, okay.
And this was for the, because it was a video, it was for the public library.
Oh, okay, cool.
Which is actually,
So you must have interviewed Dad?
I just realized this.
Yeah. In that house, probably.
In a rocking chair in one corner of the living room.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember that now. I didn't. It was like 86.
Yeah, sure. That was right when he was finishing up in the legislature.
At the time.
Yeah,
He was
but
probably in his late 70s or so, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact age.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's it.
That
Yeah.
bigger father.
Then you know how wonderful he was. Yeah, if you remember, because he usually makes an impression. He was a pretty amazing guy. Yeah.
It's good for me to remember something from the 80s.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the subject.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I just
Yep,
realized
that was it.
I got a chance to meet with your dad.
Yeah.
And have a lot of learning actually about the transition to Columbia. So.
Yeah, he was front and center and all of that.
Let me get this clear. You apprenticed about the children's petting farm somewhere else before you started your own?
No, I just had always thought it was a neat idea and thought it was, and Doug and I had talked, and Doug had actually thought before I met him, he was, you remember there was a petting farm in Columbia for a year or two down at Symphony Woods or something? I think he was going to take that over, or he was something.
So you knew of one prior to your.
Yeah, as I said, Doug and I had talked about it, but running Farm and Home was a full-time job, and so and we were raising the kids too. So it was something we talked about, but had never done anything about. But once he died, and I had to figure out what to do, it seemed like a great location. Right there, we're so far east in the county, close to everybody, and we're known in the county. We have a good reputation, and I thought I could do a good job at it. And
but you didn't have any experience with this before.
Never, nope. Just build a bunch of little barns and put some fences up and opened up the gate and kept my fingers crossed that somebody would come.
But you did have experience with loving and caring for Bobby, though.
I did. Yeah, you were not going to leave that poor pony. That pony has never had such significance.
I think what you said, Martha, was that this cider mill in Ilchester had a petting zoo.
Yes, it did.
And that's where you kind of got your inspiration.
Yeah, but I don't think I ever went to the cider mill. I just read an article in the paper that it was shutting down, and I thought, if I'm going to do it, now's the time to do it, because before someone else jumps in and takes takes up this slack, takes up this position, and all these schools were used to going to, a pumpkin patch. They need to go someplace. Why don't I open up between, it was March when I read that article, and I wanted to be open by September so that I could get all those fall pumpkin patch tours to come to me rather than find another farm, and that's what I did.
And one of the principal reasons why the children were going to the mill was because of the petting zoo.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Where was the mill in relation to your place?
Further east. It was over on Ilchester Road in the Elkridge area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Much further east.
Yeah.
Okay, so you saw an opportunity.
So I saw an opportunity and jumped on it.
But now you said, well, they're going to come and pet, and they're going to come and see animals. Should I get a lot of snakes for these kids, or what? I'm just joking.
Right.
I mean, what do I get?
Yeah.
They get a Bobby.
Yeah. Bobby Jr.
There's Bobby stuff.
Yeah.
No fun around the stuffed Bobby. Sorry.
Yeah, so I ended up getting
What is your
animals.
repertoire?
I ended up getting animals that I had never raised before. My favorite animal in the world now are goats. I never had goats before. So we had, we filled the pens with animals. I bought all the goats from the cider mill. I went to that auction, and I think anything that didn't sell, you all must have gone and gotten. But
Especially the tanks and the
yeah, but when I was at the auction, I bought the cash registers, I bought the animals, I bought the gates, I bought the feed buckets, I bought everything they had that wasn't tied down, and hired a couple of their staff, and I took as much as I could from the cider mill, and so when we opened up, we had goats, and Janet, who lives on the farm, had been raising sheep on the farm for a while, so I just borrowed a couple of sheep from her flock whenever I needed them. So we had goats and sheep, and at that time, when we first opened up, we just, I think we got a bull calf maybe from Patrick's or something like that, little Holstein calf, for our cow exhibit. And then we had people across the street had llamas, so we had their llamas. We bought or borrowed. The first year we tried really hard to borrow animals because we were only going to be open for a couple of months, and we didn't really want to take care of them all over the winter. Now, we own them all and take care of them all winter. But early on, borrowing sounded like a whole lot better idea. And we had a donkey somewhere along the line. Dad and Don, you remember Don, don't you? They had bought a donkey somewhere. They went to an auction and fell in love with Jake. So Jake is still alive. He's doesn't live at the petting farm anymore, but he still lives on our farm. And a couple of ponies, and I think the first year we might have had a peacock, a couple of turkeys, a couple of chickens, and a couple of ducks, and rabbits. So that's what we have at the petting farm. Well, the first year, this is an interesting story, even though I know we're going past time. But the very first year we opened up. We opened up in September. We opened up on Labor Day. We had the county executive out, and we cut ribbons, and I had lined up school tours to come using the cider mill's Rolodex, and because I had gotten that from Cheryl. She didn't take that to Sharps with her. That's one thing I got from her. I got her Rolodex. I had all the schools scheduled to come, all the ones that used to go to the cider mill, and I had what I considered to be a fairly successful looking prospect for the fall season. I hope to. Even today, over 50% of our business, we're open from April till November, over 50% of our business is in the month of October, even today. So, opening up for just October, wasn't a bad idea. You know, we would get the fall pumpkin patch tours. People would know who we were. We'd have a successful, you know, fall season, and then we'd open up again in the spring. The very first day, the very first tour was there. It was a little elementary school across the street, Longfellow Elementary. They showed up on, I think it was September 28th, 2002, and the very first sniper victim was shot. And they were called back to the school, and after that, the schools locked down, and that was my fall season. They caught him October 28th, and or them October 28th, and so no schools, you know, some schools, none of the public schools came because they were all locked down. Some of the private schools and daycares and things like that came. I was on the phone every week with every one of the teachers because we kept rescheduling, hoping that, you know, they'd catch him and that the restriction would be lifted before the end of the season. By the end, you know, but by the end, I knew them all. You know, we were all, you know, best friends on the phone because we talked so much. So I knew that if I could make it through the following season to the fall next year, I'd be okay. So that was my fall season. So I figured if I could make it through that, I could make it through just about anything. And we've just grown ever since.
I'm just thinking,
So,
your kids are like what?
At that
12 and
time,
14?
yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So they
They were very
an
involved.
ideal world around them. I mean, it's like, Mom,
Yeah.
could you go out and find me every animal that I like, and can I play with them all day?
Yeah. Well, but the other side of that was that I've exploited them and their friends, you know, constantly. The best years I ever had were the years when, you know, they were in high school and all their friends worked at the farm. You know, when I needed extra help, that helped with, you know, school tours, and well, they couldn't help with school tours, but they helped on the weekends with birthday parties and things like that, and walking ponies and that kind of thing. So, yeah, they were very helpful. Nora Nora farms with me full time now. She has taken over the, well, I guess before, so we ran the petting farm. We now do school tours year round, or, you know, season round. We're open April to November. We do school tours spring, summer, and fall. We do birthday parties spring, summer, and fall. We're open 6 days a week, and then we did this little thing with the Enchanted Forest starting in 2004, which you know, is a whole nother story, which I don't think we need to get into now.
Well,
but anyway, yeah.
You're too modest. That wasn't the little thing.
I do want to hear about it.
Yeah.
But
But anyway,
bear in
yeah,
mind this,
yeah.
Bear in mind this. You came from a background of farming.
Mm-hmm.
This is my perception.
Right,
It's not
right.
it's not anywhere
Right.
not yours, I'm sure. And now we got all these great animals, and we got all these kids coming out
Mm-hmm.
to see these animals. Is there some educational plan in mind here that connects these kids into this is farming? And
Absolutely.
not just we're coming to a zoo.
No,
I mean,
absolutely.
what did you do?
This is what we say about the petting zoo. We don't say petting zoo, it's a petting farm. We always say farm, and the school tours are all about the animals, all about, you know, getting children to connect to the animals. We do a pond tour, we do a garden tour. We talk about the importance of farming in the community. We talk about, you know, farm to table and where does your food come from. You know, not only do the children not know, but the parents. You know, people think cows give milk. They you know, they don't think about mammary glands and, you know, being bred and having to have a child before, you know, before you give milk. You know, oh, cows, you know, cows produce milk. You know, they don't produce milk until they've had a child, you know.
I get life before electricity talks to children.
Oh, yeah.
And I ask them if they know where their milk comes from. They invariably say Safeway.
Yeah. And they don't.
I used to think that the cow would squat over a bottle and they'd take the bottle and put a cap on it.
Yeah, right. And they don't know how, you know, chickens and eggs and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it's a very important thing that we do. And when I was growing up, most of the people that I went to school with and I grew up with were at least within a generation connected to a farm. Their parents might not be farming anymore, but their grandparents had a farm, or an aunt and uncle had a farm, and in the summer, whether they wanted to or not, they went and spent a couple of weeks on the farm and got chased around by the turkey and had to gather eggs and, pull weeds. And they had some experience with the farm. We're 3 and 4 generations away from farms now. So I think it's incredibly important that we are where we are and that we give children, because what's really weird is kids still all read books about farm animals. One of the first things that a child learns to do is moo like a cow and whatever it is, and baa like a sheep. They still read those stories, but they don't have any connection to them anymore. So that's what we provide, and it's my mission. It's what I care, passionately about. And so when the school tours comes, when the moms with strollers come, and it's just also a laid back place. There's no video games. There's no, for a day or two, for a minute or two or an hour or two, they're not doing this. They're outside, they're breathing fresh air, they're running. A lot of these kids don't even have a place to run, run free. And they're, they just spend some time outside, yeah. So it's very important.
It is.
Yeah.
And I would like to add to that, isn't being around small animals and kids enjoying them like that, isn't there some therapeuticness to that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a wonderful quote. My grandmother, I'm big on, my father wrote a memoir, and my grandmother wrote a little book called Hold Hard about animals, and, about her horse riding experiences and her fox hunting experiences. And of course, I can't remember the quote now, but it's a wonderful quote about that learning to ride and spending times with animals teaches you to take life the way it comes, with its spills and its, the good and the bad, the ups and the downs, the falls, and it teaches you, that's why I think 4-H is so important. When a child has a farm animal to take care of, you're responsible for something else. And now they make people carry around, sacks of flour or something like that to get used to what it's like to take care of a child. But all those 4-H kids, I hire 4-H kids before I hire anybody else at the farm, because, they've learned how to take care of an animal. They know how to, and it's a big responsibility, but there's a lot of compassion involved, and there's a lot of thinking about someone other than yourself, and having to go out, whether it's raining or snowing or whatever. Your animal they need to make sure they have bedding, they need to make sure they have water, they need to make sure they have feed. And you might not want to go out someday when the pipes are frozen. And God knows how many times as a kid, taking care of the animals on the farm, the hydrant would be frozen, and I'd have to go into the house and boil a teapot of water and take the teapot of water down and pour it over the hydrant, and it wasn't enough, and then you'd have to go back up and get another teapot of water and go down and pour it over the hydrant until and break the ice in the water buckets and whatever it took to make sure the animals had fresh water. And all of that's important.
Life.
Yeah.
The farm also teaches you about where life comes from.
Yes, and death.
Yes,
life and death. I mean, and any child who grows up on a farm has seen, babies born dead or die soon afterwards, and those are important lessons.
Even just teaching somebody what a corn stalk is for, where it came from, and what it's going to do. It's life.
Yeah.
Nora?
Nora.
Mm-hmm. Nora went to college and studied agriculture?
No, yes, eventually. She actually.
Tell me the Nora evolution.
The Nora evolution. Nora grew up, working at the corn stand and working at the petting farm. But also, before I opened the petting farm, she had an idyllic time in her life too, when all she did was ride horses. She was, I don't know, there's a pattern here.
I just hope she didn't name the horse Bobby.
No. So she competed from the time she was 9 till she went off to college. Almost every weekend, and that's what I did while Doug was running the store. I took Nora to horse shows, and we did horse shows and chased points, and rode against the same kids every weekend, and she did very well. So she went to a school in New Jersey that focused on equine studies, and didn't know what she wanted to do, but thought that she loved horses. She wanted to work outside. She thought she'd do something with horses. And then my dad died, and the summer that he died, I think she realized that she wanted to run the farm, and so she transferred to the University of Delaware with the ag and got a degree in ag and natural resources, and came back. And by that time, I had inherited some cattle from Dad, and I had turned it into a 100% grass-fed beef operation. So, so I had started retailing, because we have the store right there on the farm, and we're open 6 days a week. I had started retailing the 100% grass-fed beef at the farm, and so I turned that operation over to her. She's since added pigs to the operation and chickens to the operation. So she now raises pork and eggs, sells pork and eggs in addition to the 100% grass-fed beef. Plus, she is the person that is in charge of the animals at the petting farm. She is 100% responsible for their, I mean, we have people on site all day when the petting farm's open to feed and take care of them and take care of the visitors and that kind of thing. But she is, anytime something goes wrong with them, she's the first person to be called. She decides what we're going to have at the farm and what ones we're going to get rid of, what new ones we're going to bring in. She's totally responsible for their vet care. She does the night watches right now where all of our baby goats are being born. She's in charge of all of that. And then it's all hands on deck in October, because that's our busy season. So we all work full time then. So she is my right-hand person, in addition to, and then she also has taken over the entire vegetable operation at the farm. So she runs the roadside vegetable stand. She has a 60-person CSA and just does the whole meat operation and runs the petting farm. So I know.
Oh, there's no such thing as a proud mom.
There you go. That's right. And my son's at Georgetown University in the School of Foreign Service. So,
That's where it works.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So,
So tell me, what's it called? Ellie Oak?
We call it Clark's Ellie Oak Farm.
Which is part of the petting farm.
The petting farm operation is called Clark's Ellie Oak Farm. She calls her operation Clark's Farm. It drives the bank crazy, it drives our accountant crazy, and it drives probably everyone else crazy. It's just hard to figure, we needed to distinguish the two. So she's Clark's Farm and I'm Clark's Ellie Oak Farm.
As her expert advisor,
yes.
What is Nora's master plan now?
Well, she's got way too much work on her plate right now. So she is doing it all now. I think she may decide, she doesn't want to drop any of it. That's her problem. She likes each part of it. She could, sort of expand one and get rid of the other, or, but we all know that a diversified farming operation is the best way to operate a farm. The minute, if she just got, if she got rid of the animals and just did the produce, you're really at the vagaries of the weather. If she just did the meats and didn't do the produce, that might be a little bit a better way to go. But she likes, she likes both parts of it. So she's not sure. Right now she's going to do the same thing she's done in the past. She's for the last couple of years, and And a lot depends on the help. You know, we get in help to weed and harvest and sell. And sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not as good. And when they're not as good, it means there's so much more work for you. So each year, you know, if she has good help, she goes, oh, I can do this. And then other years, it's sort of like, oh, I can't do this all by myself.
Just out of curiosity, what age group is Nora in?
Nora's 28.
Same age as my daughter.
There you go.
So she's got a lot of spunk left in her, though.
She does have a lot.
Unless she comes into some ill health, she still has a lot of spunk that she can operate at.
And of course
That's just my opinion.
yes. And of course all of this is, you knew my dad, you've been to the house. When my mom died, my dad took a stone out of that stream in the back and brought it up and put it on in the front yard as a memorial to my mom, and it has my mom's name and his birth date and death date, and now it has Dad's birth date and death date and his name on it. And etched in stone by my dad, just to make sure that we didn't forget what our mission was, it says, do you remember? It says, never sell the land.
Oh, yeah.
So you know, anytime we think we might want to, you know, go sit on a beach somewhere and be done with it all, we just go out and look at the stone and realize why we're here.
Well, this is an important question then. I'll bet you've been to the Howard County Fair.
I have been to the Howard County Fair.
At least once, right?
Yeah, a few times.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
You're walking around the fairgrounds, and a person comes up to you. It could be a girl, it could be a guy, and they recognize you because of your petting the farm, because they were there when they were a kid. But now they're in their later teens, and they're about to go to college, but they're not sure. They're thinking about going into agriculture as a serious operation or career for them. They ask you, is this something, Martha, I should do?
And this is in Howard County.
Right. Boy, I can answer that one. If I was on a debate team, I could answer that one both ways so convincingly that you would, you know, award me the prize for either way. I'm the glass half full kind of person, so I'm going to answer it, you know, as yes. And I will tell you that there are young farmers in Howard County now who went away from their farms 10 years ago and didn't think they'd be able to make a living farming in Howard County, and they are back now. There's a whole generation of young farmers farming in Howard County. John Dove, Nora, Alan Sharp, you know, and people who never farmed in their life, who, you know, it's the in thing now, this whole food, farm to table, foodies, everybody wants to know where their food comes from, everybody wants to grow it themselves. There are wonderful programs like the Beginning Farmer program that Future Harvest CASA puts on every year. And there are all these people who've never farmed before, farming city blocks in Baltimore City and in Washington, D.C., turning whole neighborhoods around. Absolutely. I think the biggest problem is if in Howard County, if you don't own land, it's tough. You know, because what it would cost you to buy even a couple of acres in Howard County, because you can make a living. You can't, you know, you're not going to be Donald Trump if you raise 2 acres of vegetables in Howard County and sell them at a farmer's market. But you can make a living doing that. I think Jack Gurley up in Baltimore County is a perfect example of that. You know, you definitely can do that, and you can, you know, can have a nice life doing that. But you can't if you have to buy land in Howard County. So if you get past that, you know, John Dove, you know, and Alan Sharp and Nora are all lucky enough to have farms. Or if you know, got parents who want to, you know, do something nice for you and buy you a little land so that you can, you know, they can do, you know, write it off on their taxes and you can farm it, that would be fine. That would be the biggest obstacle if you didn't own land in Howard County, how you could start farming in the county. But beyond that obstacle, I think it's great. We're close to 3 million people who all have to eat 3 times a day, and they're all very, they have more money than anybody else in the country. We're a very affluent county, and with that affluence comes interest in buying good quality food that they know where it comes from. Nora has a wonderful market for her 100% grass-fed beef. People, want to know that they're not buying, meat that it's been pumped with antibiotics and steroids and fed grain, so, there's definitely markets out there, and we have these farmers markets everywhere. They all need local. They're producer-owning markets. They need farmers who are producing in Howard County and filling up those markets with produce and other products. I think it's a great thing. The one thing that we are all working very hard at, as all the farmers in the county are working hard at, and I hope this is not, a fight that we will have to fight for the rest of our lives, is having our farms surrounded by development and having those people in those houses and in those developments have an idea of what they think farming should be, and it's not what we think farming should be. We've had some conflicts in the last couple of years with people who think that farming should be, a couple of pretty thoroughbreds out in a 50-acre field that's being mowed, a couple of times a month, and they want to be next to that farm. That's the farm that's their idea of farming. Not pigs, not hops, not a petting farm where people come in and out all the time and there's traffic on the roads. Not a place that might have a couple of weddings, not a place that it had, not a winery where there might be a tasting room and there might be people going in and out. Not mulch operation where there might be trucks coming in and out. Not something that smells. Not something where crops are going to be sprayed. Not something where there's going to be whatever it might be. There are a lot of things that are part of a farming operation that is not all sweetness and light. There's some parts of a farming operation that smell, and there might be combines running in the middle of the night to get a crop in. There might be trucks running up and down the road, and that's all part of farming. And we have to be tolerant of that, and we have to be able to. My concern is that I do not want my daughter to have to spend all day farming and all night down in the county council fighting for her right to farm every day. That's the one thing. That's probably the one thing that worries me more than anything else.
And having a full-time lawyer on staff.
Yeah, right. But we're all working on that. We're working on a statewide right to farm law. They're working on federal right to farm laws. And we just have to get all that in place so that when somebody complains about something we're doing, we'll say I'm sorry, and we will do everything we can to mitigate the impacts on you. But that's part of our farming operation, and we're going to be as good a neighbor as we possibly can. But you've got to be tolerant of what we do, and we would never do anything to purposely impact you, but if our smell wafts over, and when we spread manure, you're just gonna have to close your windows for a day or two and let us do our job. So there you go. There's a very, very long answer to a very complicated question, really. So I guess it's not too bad.
That's the answer I've heard.
Yeah.
And it really, I'm going to go back to part of the purpose of what you're doing. It goes back to education.
Right.
Those people in those developments aren't going to know and respect or understand and tolerate you without you and them exchanging these informations back and forth, to where some of them will start to get a twinkle and say, well, that's pretty interesting what they're doing now. I think about it differently than I
Right,
I
right,
was
yeah.
ignorant before.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, that's part of the way city life and country life
right.
have such a large space between them, if it gets that way.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in
yeah.
many cases, in many states and many counties in this country, it's gotten that way.
Yeah.
So I'm going to admire you, and I'm going to say that I'd love to hear your enthusiasm
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah. Well, I'm very optimistic.
I like that.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions you want to ask Martha?
No, I'm fine.
We're good. We're good.
Good, good.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
It's been an honor.